Hello, and how's it going, my friends? Welcome back. We just had a little bit of a weather event sweep through the area. We got a little bit of rain finally. That's a great thing. We haven't seen any moisture in over a month, so it's very welcome. But the sun is now peeking through, and it's given me enough time to get out here and get at least one thing done in the garden today. So what I'm going to be doing today is planting out some perennial tree spinach, also known as Chaya. Known botanically as Nidosculus aconitifolius, this wonderful edible perennial green needs to be cooked before enjoyed. So if you live in a more subtropical or tropical climate, USDA climate zone 10B and up, you can grow this year-round and have harvest of green leaves year-round. Here in my climate zone, I'm in zone 9B. Traditionally what happens is I have greens up until about December. Then as we drop into the colder temperatures and even below freezing, the plant will then die back, usually to the root zone. But that's okay because the plant would then come back and reemerge and start growing the following spring. Now, I did end up losing the plant a couple years back because I actually neglected it a bit too much. What I ended up doing wrong was, for one, I planted it in a very sunny area. The Chaya prefers mostly shade, actually grows very well underneath shade trees, fruit trees. It's a good forest plant that way. And because it was in full sun, it didn't suffer as far as growth is concerned, but it does like a lot of moisture. And even with the mulch I had around the plant, the soil was drying out, it was cracking. There's a lot of clay here. And so I ended up losing the plant. It didn't make it over that last winter a couple years ago. And so now I've got myself some new cuttings, and I'm going to stick these in several different areas throughout the garden. Now, just one of these plants grown to maturity is enough to feed a family of 3 or 4, no problem. And these plants can get 10 feet plus tall. Generally, they're kept pruned between 4 and 6 feet, depending on what you prefer. But I've got 10 of these plants I'm going to be sticking today, so I'm going to use this and take it to my advantage that I've got so many by planting in many different areas of the garden and see what we end up with as far as success rates. I'm looking for maybe a good microclimate where I get even more growing success. I've got one idea. I'm going to be planting this next to my fish pond. Because we got this mass of water, there should be a microclimate that develops around that surrounding area where the air temperature is a little warmer. Now, I haven't actually set up thermometers to clarify whether or not that's a fact, but it seems like that's going to work out pretty well. And because I've got a nice shade sail right over the pond, this should also do well in that area. So I've got that in mind. I've also got a couple areas under some fruit trees where I'm going to get planting. So with that, why don't you join me and I'll show you how to get these in the ground real quick. So here's a nice spot in front of the citrus, in front of the autumn olive. I've got a few weeds growing up over here, so we need to occupy this space, or else nature's going to come in and occupy it for us. So we've got some bindweed I've been fighting in this area for quite some time. So we'll pull up what we can over here. I'm not overly concerned about it. You can see I've got some cardboard here laid as a sheet mulch. Sheet mulching doesn't really effectively get rid of the bindweed. What does the best job is manually removing it, and for that, a tool like the Hori Hori I find is the best way to get this stuff out. And you just follow the root as far as you can, pull it out. It's going to break at some point. That's fine. But we just want to get the upper hand on the plant. The second best thing you could do to get rid of weeds like the bindweed is to plant other plants in its place so that you start to occupy that area. The more roots you have growing in a specific area, the less chance you're going to have weeds start to spring up. You're going to have coverage, a living mulch, so to speak, growing over the ground. And there's not going to be a lot of places for these type of weeds to take hold. All right, so we got a pretty clean area over here. You can see the soil is really nice in this area as well. Just years of mulching and also working this area, working in a lot of organic matter into this clay soil that was over here is great, because the Chaya does prefer a nice, well-draining soil, rich in nutrients. So if you've got some compost, if you got a little bit of nitrogen-rich fertilizer, you might want to mix that into your hole before you get planting as well. I'm not too concerned with that because, like I said, we've been adding in organic materials here for quite some time. We've also got worms crawling through the soil, dropping their castings. And we'll try not to disturb them too much. I always feel bad about disturbing the worms, but it's kind of hard not to when you're planting. But we can be gentle with them. Just take a little bit extra time. All right, so I think I had mentioned earlier that I allowed these to soak in a rooting hormone overnight. Maybe I didn't mention that, but this is a willow rooting hormone that I made right here on site. This is just to give the plant that much more of an opportunity to sprout roots in a quick fashion. Not necessary. Just a nice fresh cut on the bottom if you're using a cutting that you didn't harvest on site. Otherwise, if you can stick those cuttings as soon as you cut it, that's great. Now, in the past, one strategy that I employed that I'd recommend for folks who live in colder climates, you can grow this as an annual, and as the weather starts to cool down, you can take your own cuttings, pot them up, you can bring them inside, put them in a windowsill, in a greenhouse, anywhere where you can keep it, just above freezing would be great, and that should survive the plant. But anyway, I'm going to try to actually get these plants to take and perennialize without having to go through those extra steps. Now, I'm not a really big fan of pushing my zone and trying to grow things that weren't really intended to grow here. I like plants that thrive and grow easily on their own with very little or minimal effort from myself. With that being said, this is an amazing plant. I would really like to have this establish and just take off even more so than I had success in the past. So there we go. We're just going to jam these cuttings in. And, well, I don't want to go too close. About 2 to 3 feet is pretty good. Could even go further. Like I said, these plants can get quite massive. So we'll do 2. Now I'm just going to mulch around this area. Got some pine straw mulch. Sometimes people get worried that the pine straw is going to add too much acid into the soil. That's not the case when it's just working as a top dressing. Just works like any other mulch, just helping to keep the moisture in the soil. So we'll give some nice mulch around these plants, and I'm going to make sure to keep these watered as well. They do like a lot of moisture, so I don't want to allow the soil to dry out. So we've got 2 plants over here. That's a good start. Let's move on. All right, so here we are next to the fish pond, and the fish pond is kind of under construction right now. I'm doing some filter changes with the rock media that I use as a filter, and I'm also going to be doing a bit of water change, and I've been adding some rocks and other things to the area. So if it looks a little distressed, that's the reason why. But I've got a wide variety of plants growing here right next to the pond, doing very well. I've got the gomi berry, which produces wonderfully edible, delicious berries. That's a cold hardy, nitrogen fixing berry shrub. We've got yacon here, which is a tuber plant, very delicious. We've got flowers, lupine flower, some iris, some calla lily, some borage, and these plants are all thriving over here. We've also got over there some ashitaba and some perennial greens. Over in that corner is actually more of a shady spot, so I think I'm going to target that little corner over there. And check this out, guys. Look at this ashitaba plant, which is overwintered and is just thriving in this little area. This is a good indicator for me that the pond is more than likely creating a nice little microclimate around here, as well as the fact that we've got a density of plants helping to create a wind block and a little bit of shelter for these plants. I've got another ashitaba growing over here. Actually 3 plants in this area, nice and healthy. So I think I'm going to plant some chaya now, right in this little nook over here. This was an ashitaba that didn't come back. So we'll just scoop back some of the mulch, fluff up the soil a little bit. Man, once again, the soil here in this garden, I don't mean to boast or brag. I'm just trying to share with you guys results that I get here. We got a little bit of that bindweed again over here. But the mulching, the chop and dropping, the compost tea brews with the microbes, all of this has contributed greatly to the condition of this soil. It's so nutrient dense and fluffy now. Unlike the hard clay soil that we had before. There we go. Stick one cutting there. And I'm just going down about 3.5 inches. We put those kind of close together. Maybe we'll choose the most vigorous grower if one's better than the other. Or we'll just prune them in a way so they can survive close to each other. Here's a closer view of that ashitaba. Just beautiful. And down here you can see we've got some little volunteer greens coming up from the perennial greens growing in the back there. But we'll just carve out another little spot right here using the hori hori, also known as the dig dig. This is always listed in my links under my favorite gardening tool because it is so strong that you can really get deep down to remove roots, to loosen up the soil. It's got a serrated edge here if you need to cut through anything. But I use it to just loosen up the plants and stick the cutting. And we'll just scooch back some of those wood chips that are around here. Bam, there we go. 3 more Chaya plants planted. Guys, just check out this artichoke plant. I mean, I could build a little shelter under here. This thing is huge. It's overtaking everything around here, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep it or not. How could I possibly chop this thing down? It's so amazing. What I'll probably do, I'm going to start right here, is I'm going to remove a couple of these leaves. Let me show you how easy it is to prune this plant. Just like that. Now we brought in the sun for this hollyhock here. Tall flowering plant. And you see how the hori hori just cuts through the stem? Now, on a side note, this is why I love growing the artichoke. Look at the amount of sheet mulching you could use this plant for, or just simple chop and drop. Using a tool like the hori hori, that's an amazing amount of mulch right there. Put around your plants. Anyway, that corner back in there, which has a lot of perennial greens growing in there, could be a perfect spot for some of this Chaya. And here's how the chop and drop works. Find an area you want to grow in. You simply chop back some of that jungle growth. You let it fall to the ground like mulch. You open up your spot. Push back some of the mulch. Loosen up the soil, work it a little bit. Look at the mycelium, the hyphae strands running throughout the soil over here. Beautiful. Food forest gardening for the win, everybody. Here we got our Chaya cutting. We'll stick that in. Let's do 3 again in this little pocket. And we'll pack that soil down pretty good around these plants. I'm going to come back around as well to all these little patches and water them in. Now, if you're wondering why this rooting hormone has this milky appearance to it, it's because when you take a cutting from the Chaya, it oozes out this milky sap-like substance. Here we've got the beautiful plum cot tree. And why don't we try planting some of this Chaya right under this tree here. can see we've got some horseradish coming back, perennializing in this area. That's what this is here. And our little friend the pill bug enjoying it as well. Again, I just want to mention, if you have a limited amount of cuttings, or if you're trying to space things out appropriately, 2 to 3 feet is probably better. I'm not too worried about it. I just want to get at least one plant taking off in each one of these locations where I planted. So anyways, I'm going to water these in real quick and we'll call that good. Another benefit to having a pond, got fertilizer water anytime you need it. So there you have it, guys. Plant yourself some Chaya. It's not just for the subtropics or the tropics anymore. You can get this to perennialize in zone 9B and up here in the US. And don't be afraid to try your hand at growing this plant in colder climates. It may not get quite as big throughout the growing season, but towards the end of the year, if you can take some cuttings before it gets down below freezing and keep those in some pots over the winter, you can plant those back out the following year and, in a sense, have yourself a perennial that way. So with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Have yourself a great rest of the day. Until next time, this is Dan from plantabundance.com. Take care. I'll be talking to you again soon.